The title of this story is, My Parents Let My Older Brother Torment Me for Years, so I Finally Left Home. Now, 6 years later, they're reaching out. Before we jump in, I just want to say thanks for being here. We spend a ton of time searching for stories like this so we can keep bringing you the best content possible. If you enjoy these videos and want to support the channel, hitting that subscribe button really helps more than you know. Seriously, your support is what keeps all of this going, and I appreciate every single one of you for sticking around. Alright, with that said, let's get into today's story. OP begins by saying, Hey Reddit, I don't usually open up about personal stuff online, but lately I've been thinking a lot about my childhood and everything that happened growing up. This is probably going to be a long post because there's honestly a lot to unpack here. In a weird way, writing all of this out feels kind of therapeutic. Growing up in my family was rough. Complicated probably doesn't even fully cover it. Most of the time, I felt invisible, like I didn't really matter in the bigger picture. It always seemed like my family was already complete before I came along, and I was just kind of there in the background. My older brother Mason was the center of everything. In our house, he was the priority, the focus, the main character. I was more like an afterthought. Mason has ADHD, and now that I'm older, I understand that it can create real challenges for someone. But as a kid, all I knew was that every single part of our family life revolved around him. I honestly can't remember a time when he wasn't the center of attention. It felt like everyone in the house, especially my parents, adjusted their entire lives around Mason's moods, wants, and behavior. And from the very beginning, it was obvious he didn't want me around. Mason was 5 when I was born, and instead of being excited about having a younger brother, he seemed to resent me immediately. The jealousy started early and never really stopped. I don't remember those first years myself, but my mom used to tell stories about how Mason would throw huge tantrums anytime she or my dad paid attention to me. As I got older, I started seeing it firsthand. If I was happily playing with a toy, Mason would suddenly grab it away from me, even if he had zero interest in it before. It was like he couldn't stand seeing me enjoy anything. Birthdays were especially awful. Most kids grow up thinking birthdays are supposed to be fun. It's the one day where you feel important and celebrated. But for me, birthdays usually turned into disasters. Mason made sure of that every single year. Without fail, he'd throw a meltdown the moment attention shifted toward me. Sometimes he'd scream and cry. Other times he'd knock things over, ruin the cake, or make a huge scene in front of everybody. And my parents always reacted the same way. Mason doesn't mean it. He's overwhelmed. You know how Mason gets. After a while, I stopped caring about gifts altogether. Honestly, all I wanted was one single day where Mason's chaos didn't take over everything. But that never happened. Even when I got older and finally started trying to speak up for myself, it didn't matter. It was like my parents just refused to hear me. Mason always came first, no matter what. When I was little, I tried convincing myself his behavior was normal because I didn't know any different. But the older I got, the more obvious it became that Mason wasn't just difficult. He was a bully. He'd shove me for no reason, push me into things, smack stuff out of my hands, or intimidate me just because he could. It always felt like he needed to prove he had power over me. There were even times when he bit me. Looking back now, it sounds insane to say out loud, but as a kid, it genuinely scared me. My parents would laugh it off or excuse it with comments like, he's just acting like a big brother, or, you'll understand when you're older. Well, spoiler alert. I got older, and I still don't understand it. Honestly, the hardest part wasn't even Mason himself. It was my parents constantly allowing it to happen. Every time I tried explaining how much his behavior hurt me, they brushed it aside like it wasn't important. Mason is special. You need to be patient with him. I hate that word now. Patience. Because somehow, all the responsibility was always put on me instead of him. Why was I expected to be patient while he got to do whatever he wanted? Why was nobody teaching him self-control or accountability? I think that's what damaged me the most growing up. My feelings never seemed to matter. If Mason screamed at me, hit me, or terrified me to the point where I cried, my parents would rush to comfort him instead of me. He didn't mean it. They'd repeat constantly. After hearing that enough times, I actually started wondering if I was the problem. I'd sit alone in my room crying, questioning myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I deserved it somehow. But deep down, I knew none of it was fair. And Mason's problems didn't stop with me either. He struggled socially too. He never really had friends growing up. My parents constantly tried arranging playdates for him, but they almost always ended badly. Mason would make the other kids uncomfortable, act aggressively, or completely lose control, and afterward those kids usually never came back. But even then, my parents seemed more embarrassed for Mason than concerned about how his behavior affected everyone around him. Meanwhile, I learned early on that the safest thing I could do was stay quiet and avoid causing problems. I became the easy kid because I didn't want to add more stress to the house. But being the good kid didn't earn me attention or love. It just made me easier to ignore. I used to dream about having the kind of sibling relationship you see in movies. You know, where brothers protect each other, joke around together, and actually care about one another. I wanted an older brother who'd have my back. Instead, I got Mason, who genuinely seemed to enjoy making me miserable. One memory still sticks with me more than almost anything else. I was around 13 years old when I begged my parents to take me to Disneyland. Just me and them. For once in my life, I wanted something that didn't revolve around Mason. After days of asking, they finally agreed. The plan was to leave Mason with my grandparents for 3 days so I could finally have some one-on-one time with my parents. I was unbelievably excited. Honestly, I barely slept the night before because I couldn't stop thinking about it. But the second Mason found out about the trip, everything exploded. He completely lost control. He screamed, cried, threw things across the house, and worked himself into a rage. At one point, he got right in my face and yelled that he'd kill me if I tried to take our parents away from him. And yeah, I was terrified. I genuinely didn't know what he was capable of. But instead of protecting me or standing firm, my parents started begging me to let Mason come with us. It's the only way to calm him down, they said. Eventually, I gave in because they made me feel guilty for even wanting time to myself in the first place. And just like I expected, the trip turned into a nightmare. Mason refused to go on rides, clung to my mom the entire time, complained nonstop about the noise and crowds, and basically sucked all the joy out of the experience. I remember feeling completely crushed. That trip was supposed to be my moment. For once, I thought I'd finally get to feel important. Instead, it turned into another episode of The Mason Show. By the time I hit my teenage years, I started realizing how deeply my family situation had shaped me, and honestly, not in a healthy way. The resentment inside me kept building year after year. At some point, I accepted that Mason was never going to change. But my parents? They could have changed things if they wanted to. They could have set boundaries. They could have protected me. They could have stepped in. Instead, they let everything slide over and over again. Slowly, I started imagining what life would feel like if I could finally get away from all of it. It wasn't one single moment that pushed me there. It was years of smaller moments piling up. Like when Mason destroyed one of my school projects because my parents praised me for it too much, and my mom barely reacted. Or the time my dad lectured me about being understanding after Mason shoved me into a wall because I wouldn't hand him the TV remote. I spent more and more time alone in my room, replaying everything in my head and wondering why none of it seemed to matter to them. The thing is, I don't think my parents were evil people. I honestly believe they thought they were helping Mason. But in reality, all they were doing was enabling him while completely neglecting me. They were so consumed with managing Mason that I slowly disappeared into the background. And eventually, I realized something important. If I ever wanted peace in my life, I was going to have to leave. At that point, leaving home didn't even feel like a decision anymore. It felt necessary for my survival. I started seeing college as my only real way out. And I didn't mean just any college nearby, either. There was no way I was staying close enough for my parents to pressure me into coming home every weekend or guilt me into helping with Mason whenever things got difficult. I needed distance. Real distance. I wanted to finally figure out who I was outside of that house. I couldn't stand the idea of spending the rest of my life cleaning up after someone else's chaos. So when I turned 17, I started applying to schools that were as far away as possible. Every night, I'd stay up late researching campuses, looking at dorm photos, reading about student life, and imagining what it would feel like to finally have freedom. Honestly, it felt less like applying for college and more like planning an escape. I poured everything I had into it. Naturally, my parents weren't thrilled once they found out. I still remember exactly how that conversation went. We were sitting around the dinner table when I casually mentioned that I'd applied to a university across the country. The reaction was immediate. My mom literally froze in the middle of eating, and my dad slowly put his fork down like I'd just announced I was moving to another planet. "Why would you want to go that far away?" my mom asked, already sounding upset. "There are perfectly good schools here." I tried to stay calm and not let things escalate. "I just want something different," I told them. "I think it'd be good for me." That's when my dad jumped in without missing a beat. "But Mason needs you here." Hearing that honestly felt like getting punched in the stomach. Mason needs me? What about me? What about what I needed? I looked at both of them, trying to figure out how to explain the exhaustion I felt living in that house every day. But deep down, I already knew they wouldn't understand. They never had before. "I'm not responsible for Mason," I said as evenly as I could. "I need to live my own life." That's when the conversation turned into something I'll probably never forget for the rest of my life. My dad, clearly frustrated, snapped, and said something I honestly don't think he intended to say out loud. We had you so Mason would always have someone to take care of him. The second those words left his mouth, everything inside me dropped. I just sat there staring at him while my stomach twisted into knots. My mom immediately tried to backpedal. That's not what he means, she said quickly, sounding panicked. Of course we love you. You're just part of the family plan. Part of the family plan. That sentence hit me harder than anything else ever had. In that moment, my entire childhood suddenly made sense. All those years of feeling less important than Mason, all the times I came second, all the times my feelings got ignored, it finally clicked. I wasn't just second place in the family. I was the backup plan. After that, I barely said another word. Honestly, what was there left to say? Realizing your parents don't fully see you as your own person messes with your head in a way that's hard to explain. I quietly got up from the table, went upstairs, and shut myself in my room. And that night, I made a promise to myself. No matter how hard it got, I was leaving. I refused to let my parents trap me into a future I never wanted. I didn't care if they called me selfish, ungrateful, dramatic, or anything else. For the first time in my life, I was going to choose myself. The next few months passed in a blur. I buried myself in schoolwork because I knew scholarships were probably my only shot. I worked extra hours at my part-time job and saved every dollar I possibly could, even though it wasn't much. And when the acceptance letters finally started showing up, I kept them to myself at first. I wanted a solid plan before my parents found out. Eventually, I told them I'd been accepted to a university on the other side of the country. Predictably, they took it horribly. My mom cried. My dad accused me of abandoning the family. At one point, they even threatened to cut me off financially. Honestly, that part was almost funny considering there wasn't much money in my college fund to begin with. But by then, I didn't care anymore. I'd already spoken with my grandparents, and unlike my parents, they actually supported me. They offered to let me stay with them before school started, and even promised to help however they could financially. It wasn't some perfect solution, but it was enough to get me moving forward. The day I packed my things and left for my grandparents' house honestly felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. My parents made one final attempt to convince me to stay, but by then my mind was made up. I didn't look back. That summer, I worked harder than I ever had before. I saved every penny I could and spent most of my time mentally preparing for this completely new chapter of my life. Was I scared? Absolutely. But underneath the fear, there was excitement too. For the first time ever, my future actually felt like it belonged to me. Looking back now, I realized leaving home wasn't only about escaping Mason or getting away from my parents' expectations. It was about finding out who I actually was. It was about proving to myself that I mattered outside of the role my family created for me. And even though I knew life ahead wouldn't be easy, I finally felt ready for it. The day I left for college honestly felt unreal. It was like stepping into a completely different world. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without constantly worrying about Mason exploding over something or my parents pressuring me into sacrificing myself for him. I'm not going to pretend the transition was easy, though. Those first few months were brutal in a lot of ways. Money was the biggest challenge. My parents followed through on their threat and completely cut me off financially. Not that they were supporting me much before, but it still hurt knowing how easily they discarded me. And honestly, it wasn't really about the money itself. It was the message behind it. If I refused to play the role they designed for me, then suddenly I wasn't worth investing in. After I left, I barely heard from them at all. No calls, no texts, no checking to see if I was okay. Nothing. The silence spoke louder than words ever could. Thankfully, my grandparents stayed in my corner through all of it. They'd already helped me during the summer before college, but emotionally they supported me too. I still remember my grandpa sitting me down one day and telling me I should never feel guilty for wanting my own life. He told me he was proud of me for chasing my future. Honestly, hearing someone say they were proud of me almost broke me emotionally because I wasn't used to hearing that. I think my grandparents were the only reason I didn't completely fall apart during that time. Once classes started, I quickly realized how unprepared I was for the real world compared to everyone else around me. Most of the other students seemed so comfortable and confident. They had supportive parents, financial help, and the safety net of knowing somebody would catch them if they failed. I didn't have any of that. While everyone else was focused on parties and college experiences, I was juggling student loans, bills, and part-time jobs just to survive. I ended up working as a server at a diner near campus, often pulling late-night shifts so I could afford rent, food, and textbooks. Some nights, I dragged myself back to my dorm, so exhausted I could barely stay standing. But quitting was never an option. I had no backup plan waiting for me. If I failed, there was nobody coming to rescue me. Still, despite all the stress and exhaustion, I loved finally being on my own. Nobody was constantly criticizing me. Nobody was telling me to be patient with Mason. Nobody was guilt-tripping me into sacrificing myself. For the first time in my entire life, I actually had control over my own decisions. And the biggest changes weren't just financial. Emotionally, being away from home forced me to finally confront everything I'd gone through growing up. Back in high school, I was so focused on surviving day-to-day life that I never really stopped to process how damaged I actually felt. But in college, there were nights where I'd lie awake in my tiny dorm room replaying old memories in my head for hours, trying to make sense of all of it. One thing that really stuck with me was how little effort my parents made once I left. I wasn't expecting them to beg me to come home or anything like that, but the silence from them was deafening. For a long time, I convinced myself that deep down, my parents cared about me in their own messed up way. But after months passed without a single phone call, text, or even a simple check-in, I started seriously questioning that belief. Did they actually care about me at all? Or was my dad telling the truth that night at dinner? Was I really just brought into the world to make Mason's life easier? While I was trying to figure all that out, my grandparents occasionally filled me in on what was happening back home. Apparently, Mason didn't handle my absence well at all. Without me around to absorb his anger and outbursts, he started taking it out on other people. According to my grandparents, he'd begun terrorizing neighborhood kids, throwing tantrums over tiny things, and making life miserable for basically everyone around him. Part of me felt guilty hearing about it. There was a voice in the back of my head wondering if leaving had somehow made things worse. But another part of me felt something else too. Relief. For once, I wasn't the one carrying the burden anymore. And honestly, being away from all of that allowed me to finally start growing into my own person. Little by little, I started thriving. I made a few close friends in college, real friends who liked me for me. They didn't know about my chaotic childhood or treat me like I existed only to take care of somebody else. Being around people who actually saw me felt strange at first, but in a good way. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. Slowly, I started realizing I had an identity outside of my family drama. Academically, I pushed myself hard. I wasn't naturally the smartest guy in every room, but I worked harder than almost anyone else. Every good grade felt personal. Every A I earned felt like proof that I could succeed without my parents' approval, support, or constant criticism. Honestly, it felt like a giant middle finger to everything they expected from me. I didn't just want to survive anymore. I wanted to build a life I could actually be proud of. And eventually, all that hard work paid off. By the time I graduated, I had a degree, a job offer waiting for me, and a feeling of accomplishment I'd honestly never experienced before. My grandparents showed up to my graduation and cheered louder than anyone there. Seeing them in the crowd meant everything to me. My parents, though? Nothing. No message. No congratulations. Not even a phone call. I told myself I didn't expect them to come, but the truth is, it still hurt more than I wanted to admit. It was just another reminder that outside of my role in Mason's life, I barely seemed to matter to them at all. After college, I moved to a different city and started my first real full-time job. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it paid decently, and for the first time ever, I wasn't constantly panicking about money. I could finally breathe financially. I started aggressively paying down my student loans, but more importantly, I started paying my grandparents back for everything they'd done for me over the years. They never once asked me for repayment. Honestly, they probably would have refused it if I hadn't insisted. But paying them back mattered to me because I wanted them to know how grateful I was. They were the only family members who truly showed up for me when I needed help. Meanwhile, updates about Mason kept trickling in through my grandparents. And none of them were good. His behavior was getting worse and worse, and my parents were struggling to control him now that I wasn't there anymore. Apparently, he'd started targeting neighborhood kids, dumping water on them, screaming at them, and aggressively telling them to stay away from his street. Eventually, one of the parents finally got fed up and called the police. Mason ended up getting arrested for harassing children, and my parents had to bail him out. Honestly, hearing about it didn't shock me at all. It just made me sad, because after all those years, nothing had changed. Mason was still acting exactly the same, and my parents were still enabling him instead of forcing him to face consequences. And through all of it, they still never contacted me. Not once. At some point, I realized they had basically erased me from their lives completely. And strangely enough, I was okay with that. I didn't need them anymore. I'd spent my entire childhood begging for scraps of love and approval from people who never truly saw me. Eventually, I got tired of chasing something I was never going to receive. For the first time ever, I was living life for myself. And honestly, it felt incredible. But of course, that peace didn't last forever. One random day, completely out of nowhere, my phone started ringing. I looked down and saw my dad's name on the screen. After 6 straight years of silence, they were suddenly calling me. Immediately, my stomach tightened. I didn't know exactly why they were reaching out, but I had a very strong feeling it wasn't because they suddenly missed me. At first, I almost ignored it. Part of me thought maybe it was a butt dial or some accidental call. But something stopped me. I stared at my phone for a few seconds, debating whether answering was a terrible idea. Eventually, against my better judgment, I picked up. Hello. Even I could hear how cautious my voice sounded. Hey, it's Dad. The first thing I noticed was how exhausted he sounded. Older too. How have you been? Honestly, that question caught me off guard. How exactly are you supposed to respond to someone who disappeared from your life for 6 years? I'm fine, I said carefully. What's going on? There was a pause on the other end. That hesitation immediately told me something was wrong. My dad was never the type to dance around a topic unless he was building up to bad news. Well, your mom and I have been talking, he finally said. We think it's time to move past everything. We miss you, and we want to make things right. I didn't respond right away. My brain immediately started trying to figure out what the real motive was. Why now? Why after 6 years of total silence? I didn't buy the whole, we miss you speech for even a second. That's nice, I replied flatly. But what do you actually want? He let out this long sigh, almost like he was annoyed I wasn't playing along. Things have been difficult lately, he admitted. Mason's, well, he's gotten himself into some trouble. And there it was. Of course this was about Mason. Everything in my life always circled back to him somehow. What kind of trouble? I asked, already dreading the answer. My dad hesitated again before explaining everything. Apparently, Mason's behavior in the neighborhood had gotten so bad that people finally stopped tolerating it. He'd been harassing kids, screaming at them, throwing water on them, and causing constant problems until one of the parents finally called the cops. Now Mason had been arrested, and there was a court case coming up. Okay, I said slowly. And why exactly are you telling me this? We need help, my dad admitted bluntly. He sounded exhausted. Your mother and I are at the end of our rope. We're trying to get Mason into therapy, but it's expensive. And now with the legal situation, we need money for a lawyer too. Then came the part one already knew was coming. We figured, since you're doing well now, maybe you could help out financially. I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. 6 years of silence. 6 years without caring whether I was alive or dead. And now suddenly they remembered I existed because they needed money from Mason. The same person who made my childhood miserable. Are you serious right now? I asked, barely containing my anger. Come on, my dad said. You know how hard this has been on us. He's your brother. It's time to help your family. That's when I completely snapped. Years of anger, resentment, pain, and frustration came pouring out all at once. Help the family? I shot back. You mean the same family that abandoned me the second I tried living my own life? The same family that stood there and let Mason terrorize me for years without doing anything? My dad tried interrupting me, but I kept going. You didn't care about me when I needed help. Not once in 6 years did you bother calling me. And now suddenly I'm supposed to swoop in and save everybody? I was shaking at that point. Absolutely not. There was dead silence on the line for a few seconds. Finally, my dad spoke again, quieter this time. We're sorry, okay? We know we made mistakes. But Mason's struggling, and we don't know what else to do anymore. Can't you just forgive us and help? I actually laughed when he said that, but there wasn't anything funny about it. You really think this is about forgiveness? I said bitterly. You think saying sorry magically erases years of neglect and abuse? I took a breath before continuing. You don't get to ignore me for years, and then suddenly expect me to rescue everybody the second things become inconvenient for you. I paused. I'm not Mason's caretaker, and I never will be. That's your responsibility, I told him. Not mine. And before he could argue any further, I hung up. The second the call ended, I realized my hands were trembling. I had to sit down for a minute just to calm myself. Honestly, I couldn't even tell whether I felt more hurt or more furious. After 6 years of silence, they suddenly came back into my life acting like I owed them something. The audacity of it all was unbelievable. Later that night, my mom sent me a huge text message. It was packed with apologies. She said they regretted how they handled things when Mason and I were growing up. She admitted they should have done better and acknowledged that they failed me in a lot of ways. But even through all the apologies, there was still one main point underneath it all. They wanted my help. She kept saying Mason's situation had become serious and that they couldn't handle everything on their own anymore. I stared at the message for a long time without replying. Honestly, I didn't even know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell them exactly where they could shove their apology. But another part of me still felt guilty somehow, even though logically I knew I had no reason to. That was the frustrating part. No matter how much I tried convincing myself I was done caring about them, there was still a small piece of me that did. For the next few days, my emotions were all over the place. Was I being too cold? Was I holding on to the past too much? Should I at least hear them out? But every time I started doubting myself, old memories came rushing back. I remembered all those years I spent begging for support, understanding, or protection only to be ignored every single time. And it wasn't just Mason's bullying that haunted me. It was the constant reminder that my feelings never mattered in that house. I was always expected to sacrifice, adjust, and stay quiet while Mason's needs came first. So no, I wasn't ready to forgive them. Especially not when they only decided to contact me because they needed something. That week, I ended up having a long conversation with my grandparents. They'd always been my safe place growing up, and honestly, I needed their perspective more than ever. I told them everything. I explained how my parents called out of nowhere, how they wanted money for Mason's legal issues and therapy, and how angry and conflicted I felt about the whole situation. My grandpa sat quietly listening while I vented. When I finally stopped talking, he looked at me and said something I'll probably never forget. "You don't owe them anything." He said it firmly too, without hesitation. They made their choices. Now they have to deal with the consequences of those choices. It's not your responsibility to fix this for them. Hearing that from him honestly felt like a giant weight lifting off my shoulders. For years, I'd carried this invisible pressure that somehow my family's happiness rested on me. But the truth was, I'd already sacrificed enough. I spent my entire childhood accommodating Mason, walking on eggshells, and giving up my own needs just to keep peace in the house. I had already given them more than they deserved. Even so, I couldn't completely shut off my emotions about what my parents were going through. Over the following weeks, I kept hearing updates through my grandparents. Apparently, Mason's court date was approaching fast, and my parents were scrambling trying to figure out what to do. According to my grandparents, they'd spoken with a lawyer who believed Mason might avoid jail time if he agreed to attend court-ordered therapy. On paper, that sounded positive. But my grandparents didn't sound very hopeful. They didn't believe my parents would truly commit to the process because they'd spent years avoiding professional help for Mason in the first place. "Your mom still thinks she can manage him herself," my grandma told me one day. "She refuses to admit things are out of control." Hearing that honestly made me feel both sad and angry at the same time. My parents had spent years protecting Mason from consequences and excusing every terrible thing he did. Now they were finally facing the fallout from all those decisions. And even now, they weren't really reaching out because they cared about rebuilding a relationship with me. They wanted me to step in and rescue them, just like always. That realization helped me finally strengthen my boundaries. If my parents genuinely wanted to repair things between us, then it needed to be about more than Mason. They needed to fully acknowledge the years of neglect, pain, and emotional damage they caused me. And more importantly, they needed to actually change. I refused to be their backup plan anymore. A few weeks later, my grandparents updated me again. Mason's court hearing had come and gone. The judge ordered him into therapy and also issued a restraining order requiring him to stay away from the neighborhood kids he'd been harassing. My grandparents sounded cautiously hopeful about it. Me? I wasn't exactly optimistic. Sure, therapy could potentially help him, but only if my parents actually supported the process instead of continuing to excuse his behavior. Given their history, I wasn't convinced they'd stick with it. Meanwhile, my parents still hadn't contacted me directly again. At least not yet. But apparently my mom had been venting to my grandma about me during one of their conversations. According to my grandma, my mom was upset that I ignored her messages and believed I was intentionally punishing them by staying distant. When I heard that, I just shook my head. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was self-protection. There's a huge difference. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't truly over yet. My parents had never been good at letting things go, especially when Mason was involved. And sure enough, a few days later, I got another message. This time it came from a number I didn't recognize. It was my dad using a different phone. The text itself was short. "We're sorry if we upset you. We just want to talk. Please give us a chance." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me was curious. Had they actually changed? Did they really regret everything? Was there any chance they genuinely wanted to repair our relationship? But another part of me knew better. I'd worked way too hard to build a peaceful life away from all their chaos. I wasn't about to risk getting pulled back into the same toxic cycle. In the end, I decided not to answer. I wasn't ready. And more importantly, I wasn't going to let guilt make decisions for me anymore. If my parents truly wanted to make amends, then words alone weren't enough. They'd need to prove it through consistent actions over time. After ignoring my dad's latest message, I finally started feeling like I was closing a chapter of my life that had stayed open for far too long. For most of my childhood and teenage years, my entire identity revolved around surviving my family's dysfunction. But now I was finally in control of my own life. That didn't mean the emotions magically disappeared overnight, though. I still had a lot to unpack emotionally, and moving on completely was going to take time. A few weeks after that text, my grandparents gave me another update about things back home. Apparently, Mason had officially started his court-ordered therapy sessions. But unsurprisingly, he fought it every step of the way. According to my grandparents, he threw an enormous tantrum before his first appointment, screaming that he didn't need help and insisting everyone else was the problem. My mom practically had to drag him out of the house. Honestly, hearing that didn't surprise me at all. That was classic Mason behavior. Still, I felt conflicted hearing about it. Part of me was relieved that somebody was finally forcing him to confront his issues instead of endlessly excusing them. But another part of me wondered whether therapy could even undo decades of enabling. A court order alone can't magically fix someone after years of never facing consequences. At the same time, my parents were still drowning financially. Between legal fees, fines, therapy costs, and everything else tied to Mason's situation, they were barely managing to stay afloat. My grandparents admitted they'd stepped in a couple times to help cover some expenses, even though my parents never outright asked. They clearly weren't happy about it, but they also couldn't sit back and watch everything collapse. Honestly, I felt bad for my grandparents more than anyone else. They'd already done so much for me over the years, and now they were getting pulled into my parents' problems too. I even told them they didn't need to keep updating me if it became too emotionally draining. But my grandma shook her head. "You deserve to know what's happening," she told me, "even if you're not involved directly." Despite everything, my grandparents still encouraged me to keep a healthy distance from my parents. They understood how damaging that family dynamic had been for me, and they didn't want me slipping back into it. "Your parents need to learn how to handle their own lives," my grandpa told me, "and you need to keep building yours." So that's what I focused on. Every now and then, I'd still hear little updates about Mason's therapy progress. Apparently, things were rocky, but the therapist believed there was at least some hope for improvement. Meanwhile, my parents were trying to repair their image in the neighborhood after everything Mason had done to the local kids. It sounded exhausting, honestly, but that was their road to walk, not mine. As for me, I finally started planning for my future in ways I'd never been able to before. For years, I'd saved every extra dollar I could, and eventually, I realized I was finally in a position to do something I'd always dreamed about: travel. I booked a backpacking trip through Europe, and honestly, the idea of exploring new countries completely on my own felt equal parts exciting and terrifying. Before leaving, I made sure to spend time with my grandparents. I wanted them to know how grateful I was for everything they'd done for me over the years. Their support, love, and belief in me had honestly changed my life. We spent the day talking, laughing about old memories, and just enjoying each other's company. Before I left, my grandpa gave me one of his classic speeches. "You've been through a lot," he told me, "but you came out stronger because of it. Don't ever let anyone take that strength away from you." Those words stuck with me. As I boarded the plane for Europe, I sat there thinking about everything that had happened and how far I'd come. Maybe my parents would never fully understand the damage they caused me. Maybe Mason would never truly change. But for the first time in my life, I realized something important. That was okay, because I wasn't living my life for them anymore. I was finally living for myself. And honestly, that was enough.